Okay, so I can see a number of people joining, and a big welcome to you all. And thank you, Beth, for putting up the title for today's talk. And of course, to remind everyone that the Masterclass series runs on the fourth Thursday of each month, or at least most months during the academic term. And you'll see at the foot of the slide all the various collaborators and partners involved. But for this Thursday afternoon, or indeed it may be morning or evening, or perhaps even night, depending on where you're at, I'm delighted to welcome Prof. Winnie Dunn and Sonja Duric, or Duric even. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name, Sonja. Designing for sensory comfort. And I was just saying before we came on that for me, this is a very important area because I think in terms of neurodiversity, um, I have spoken with a number of autistic people and also people with ADHD, for example, who would describe sensory discomfort and overload as a considerable issue for them. But just by way of brief introduction, so Dr. Winnie Dunn is Distinguished Professor of Occupational Therapy Education in the University of Missouri. She is also a certified positive psychology coach. She is known for studies about sensory processing in everyday life. She published more than 100 research articles, chapters, and books, and speaks internationally about her work. She created the Sensory Profiles, which has been translated into dozens of languages. She received the Award of Merit, Eleanor Clark Sagel Lectureship, belongs to the Academy of Research, and received the A. Jean Ayres Research Award. She is honored for innovative and engaging teaching. Excellent, I must say. Chancellor's Excellence in Teaching Award, Kemper Teaching Fellowship, and Chancellor's Distinguished Professorship. She wrote a book for the public, Living Sensationally, Understanding Your Senses, which was featured in Time magazine, Cosmopolitan magazine, Canadian Public Radio, and London Times newspaper. Living Sensationally received the Seal of Excellence from the Children of the New Earth magazine. Her recent work demonstrates the effectiveness of coaching and telehealth. Um, Brilliant. And just in relation to positive psychology, it's an area relating to mental health more generally, which I recall looking at in some detail some years ago. So I salute you, Dr. Dunn, in that regard. And
Right back at you.
thank you, thank you. And Sonia, how do I pronounce your second name? I do apologize.
The way you pronounced it is fine. I say Duric, it's the
Duric.
anglicized,
Brilliant,
yes.
brilliant.
But of
Thank you.
Croatian heritage, I am.
Oh, very good.
Yes,
Very good.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, Croatia, I mean, it's a particularly beautiful country with the Dalmatian coast. But anyhow, I'll move on. Sonia is currently a director and partner at Studio BE, a new design practice she co-founded in May 2025 with three long-standing colleagues. She is currently a board director at Architects Without Frontiers. With over 25 years of experience, Sonia has focused on the psychology of space and how creative design can shape meaningful outcomes in the built environment. She is widely respected for her ability to build consensus among diverse stakeholders and has established a strong professional network in Melbourne over the past 2 decades. Her work is underpinned by a passion for research and design that drives social impact. Sonia currently leads the Working Brain, a research initiative focused on neurodiversity and mental health. The project explores how sensory design strategies can create more inclusive environments that support participation and success. Over the past 5 years, the Working Brain has conducted research in collaboration with distinguished Professor Winnie Dunn, focusing on the understanding of sensory profiles. And certainly, just reflecting on your work, Sonja. I'm our own in University College Dublin, the head of architecture, is doing a lot of work as well in this space, specifically relating to light, as one dimension. Um, and In fact,
Amazing.
we have collaborated with some colleagues from the University of Minnesota in relation to the role of architecture and interior design, not just in neurodiversity, but in mental health. Anyhow, enough from me. Uh, of course, as always, greetings to Ken, Kilbride of ADHD Ireland, and of course, Valerie Andrews and Beth Kilkenny from our own College of Health and Agricultural Sciences here in UCD. So over to you, Winnie and Sonia. Looking forward to your talk.
Thanks so much. I'm going to take a minute here and share my screen so you can see our beautiful slides and follow along. There. Can you see it? Are they visible?
Just, yes.
Yeah.
Now we can. Okay. So our talk is designing for sensory comfort. I want you to take note that we're talking about it in a neutral way because Sonja and I believe that all the people need to be included in all the places. It's not about something being wrong with anyone. It's about knowing what everybody's patterns of sensory processing are and making plans based on that. So you already got introduced to both of us. We look equally adorable in person as we do on the slide. So the first thing we have to deal with is, what is sensory processing? So we think sensation is something that is so ubiquitous to our human experience that sometimes we forget to think about it. So sensory information for your brain and your body includes seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and touching. It also includes the internal feelings in your body, like feeling hungry, feeling anxious, and movement and balance. And the accuracy of all those sensory receptors is called acuity. So we can test for how accurate your sensory receptors are working. But in addition to that, we have to think about a thing called processing, which is how the brain organizes all that information, derives meaning from the information to make plans about what to do, what behaviors we might engage in. So we're talking about the processing part, or the part where the brain makes a plan with all the sensory input available. And it's important to remember that all of us have sensory patterns, not just people that are neurodiverse, like people with autism or ADHD or schizophrenia. Every single human has sensory patterns. And those patterns that we have that are part of who we are, they affect everything that we do during the day. It affects everything that we do. So just for some quick examples, if you're sensitive to light, you do things like pull the shades down. If sounds overwhelm you, you might prefer to eat at home rather than going to a restaurant where there's a lot of ambient noise. If you love the feeling of crowds and people around you and all the vibrancy of being in a dense crowd, you might choose to go to lots of public events. If you're slow to notice things, which is another pattern we see, you might be more clumsy in new places because you're not detecting all the details that you need to move around properly. So when we think about these behaviors, I've done research for decades now, looking at what those patterns are and how they might affect behavior. So the first thing we have to think about is this model that I'm showing you is called Dunn's sensory processing framework. And it derived out of data from about 1,000 families telling us what their experience with their children was. I'm telling you that because people can make a model about anything, and then they can test it to see if the model holds up. But this model was derived from data of families telling us about their children. And so I realized, and it took me a while, I'll say it fast, but it was slow in learning, There's two basic constructs we need to think about. The pink arrow tells us the neurological thresholds, and that's how your nervous system, how your neurons respond to sensory experiences. And they go from low at the bottom of the circle to high at the top. And so when you have high sensory thresholds, it means your neurons and your brain take a lot of information in order to act or fire. If you have low thresholds, it means your neurons and your brain are noticing many, many things, and you're quick to notice, but it also means that your brain can get overwhelmed with too much stimuli. So all of us live somewhere on that pink continuum between high and low thresholds. The other core concept is self-regulation, which goes from the left to the right on the diagram. On the passive side, this all comes from the psychological literature, and it's about self-regulation. If you have passive self-regulation, then you let things happen to you and then you respond or react to them. If you have active self-regulation, you behave in ways to get more sensory input or to get less sensory input. So you're actively acting in your own behalf to get the right amount of input you need. So when we intersect the psychological continuum of self-regulation and the neurological continuum of how the brain and the nervous system work, we end up with 4 patterns of sensory processing. So you can see them on the slide: seeking, avoiding, sensitivity, and registration. Those are our 4 patterns. And remember, we got these from the parents telling us about their children. So let's talk about each one in a little bit. The seekers in the top right have high thresholds and active self-regulation. Seekers are busy. Their brains are geared to detect novelty, so they do best in busy environments with a lot going on. I have to talk to parents. They think their child has to have quiet to study. Well, if they're a seeker, the quiet is going to make their brain drift looking for sensory input. They need that variety of input to be able to focus their attention. On the bottom, we see avoider on the right. Avoiders have low sensory thresholds and active self-regulation. They are the ones that anticipate. Their brain is geared to detect every detail and anticipating that that's going to be too much or it's going to be threatening, like autonomic responses. They do things to get less input. So avoiders like to work from home. They might do takeout. They do things to reduce the amount of extra sensory input that they're getting. The third category is sensitivity or sensors. They have low thresholds, as you see, with passive self-regulation. These individuals try to participate and then get overwhelmed. So behaviors you might see are being bossy. Could you stop chewing that gum? Could you turn those lights down? Because they try to get in there. Avoiders stay away. They anticipate and stay away. Sensors try to participate and then get overwhelmed. And then our final category, registration, we call the people bystanders. They have really high thresholds, just like seekers, but they have a passive method. So they don't notice things. They fail to detect, but they're also very easygoing. That's a really cool thing about bystanders, is that they can handle a lot more things than the rest of us can. So when we look at this pattern in a little bit more detail, I'm just going to give you some key phrases to remember. So seekers are busy and they engage in the environment with other people, with objects, to get more sensory input. Avoiders notice more things and they find ways to retreat. Sensors notice more intensely, just like avoiders, but they stay there. They try to stay and they get overwhelmed. So we have to help them have the right sensory environment for their work. And then the final group is the low registration group. They're very easygoing, but they miss cues that others might notice, which would give them an idea about what other people are experiencing at the same time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sonja. She and I've done some projects together where we're looking at people in their workplaces to see how those sensory patterns show up in different work environments. So go, Sonja.
Thank you. So over the last maybe 5 or so years, we have used Winnie's sensory processing uh, questionnaire and tool uh, within our organisations that we've been designing workplaces for. And we created this tool so that it's online with Winnie's permission. And we also engaged with the people who were responding to the questionnaire in a way that they remained anonymous and they gave themselves a code name. And that helped us understand our main question was we wanted to understand what the sensory processing patterns were in the general population, specifically within the area of workers and workplace. And so we chose 10 different organisations, and they're all described here by the type of organisation. So we went from design practices because we had them at the ready to product suppliers to car manufacturers to energy providers. So quite a diverse group of workplaces that we were designing for. And to the right, we had our response rate as well as our number of people who responded to our sensory profile questionnaire. And so our total sample is 1,255 people. And since then, we've been using this tool and expanding that data set. But for this paper that we have written, that's our sample size. So we can go on to the next slide. And what we found, and for those 5 years of research and with Winnie's incredible help, what we found is summarized in this one slide, which sort of is kind of cool, but also is funny because there was so much work to get to the point of summarizing in this one slide. Um, but what in the pie chart to the right, what we had discovered is that out of the circle, out of the pie chart, 60% of us had a strong or moderate response to the particular categories that Winnie described to you earlier in at least one of those four categories. So do you remember the avoider, the sensor, the bystander, and the seeker? So they're the four, and we were looking for a strong or moderate response in at least one of those categories. And we had made the assumption that we would get a response somewhere around 20% because we made maybe the simplistic hypothesis that based on our sort of data that we were able to find, about 1 in 5 of us is likely to be neurodiverse. And we made the kind of parallel between being neurodiverse and possibly having these, in our sort of design language, we've called it heightened sensory responses. So we thought we would get a response of about 20%. So we were very surprised when our data was much higher, and that's in blue, and we were finding that 60% of us had a response to either a moderate or strong, at least one of those categories. And what Winnie has taught us is that this is more impacting within the population, and it was the autistic people who showed us the way to start with, to start unpacking this data. And so what we've done as well is broken up that blue section into the four parts. So the light blue is the group one, and 29% of the light blue had a strong or moderate response to one category. And then the 18% group, the slightly darker blue, had a response to two of the categories in either strong or moderate response. 12% had a response to the three categories, and 1% of our sample size had a response to four of the categories. And Winnie, you can maybe articulate it a little bit better than my sort of design language and not necessarily um, uh, sort of
Mhm.
in a way that maybe a researcher or your what I'm trying to say is what you found, but from your paper on the children,
Yes,
the little sensory
right.
profile study, uh, what we interpreted from that is that those with moderate to high response in three or four categories are potentially likely to also be neurodiverse. Have I
Well,
articulated that okay?
yeah, I think
Mm.
additional to that, Sonja, is that we also found people in the general population that don't have any diagnoses that also had three or four responses outside
Yep.
the expected range. And so that paper that you're referring to, what we were trying to show is these patterns that you see on this chart also occur in the general population. So we cannot ascribe intense sensory responses to only people that are neurodiverse. There are people in the general population that also have those patterns. And that's where I think you and I, with the, designing the workplace for all the people, it reminds us that we are making it comfortable for all the people, but that also means that for the neurodiverse population, we're creating spaces where they also can thrive and work. And we're not doing it because they have a disability. We're doing it because it's good for everyone. It's like a universal design feature that acknowledges that we all have these sensory patterns. Some of us have a diagnosis and some of us do not, but we still all have them.
Thank you, thank you. And so that was our first question that we asked, and that is shown in the blue part of the pie chart. And then the second question that we were particularly interested in, because we felt that through the built environment, we could really impact how we design our spaces based on this information. We were interested in understanding out of those 60%, who, which participants in the survey were quick to detect and which ones were slow to detect. So Winnie earlier on described in her diagram the neurological threshold. And so that's what we were looking at. And so we've added a little descriptor there. So for the quick to detect, they are the people who are hypersensitive, so very sensitive or oversensitive. And the people who are slow to detect are hyposensitive or undersensitive. So in Winnie's model, the people who belong to the slow to detect or the hyposensitive are the bystanders and the sensors, and the people who belong to the hypersensitive are the seekers and the
Okay, we can go back. I'll show.
avoiders.
Yeah. So
Yes,
the
yeah,
hypersensitivity are the sensitivity and the avoiding the purple and the yellow. And
yes.
people with high thresholds are seekers and bystanders at the top.
So going back down, that was particularly interesting to us because we were kind of wanting, if we were to apply sort of design lingo to that, what we were trying to understand is what proportion of our space should be designed to stimulate and what proportion of our space should be designed to calm, to accommodate those groups. And what we discovered in the percentages there, if we were to apply a mathematical formula, is that about 50%, 49% require calming, soothing spaces, retreat spaces, low stimulation spaces. They're all descriptions that we could use to describe that group. And about a third require high stimulation spaces, spaces that are more intense, that are maybe more bold, maybe more noisy, maybe more active. And then there might be, with what's left over in that, to get to 100%, might be the in-between spaces when we apply it to sort of design planning. So spaces where you might recalibrate, or neutral zones. So how does that look in application? We've developed also a diagram to the application of that research in designing. So we have four main ingredients there, and we've called them sensory design inclusions. So designs that assist workers to be their best, and they might be things that might include lighting that you can, for example, dial down or up in brightness, and maybe color temperature. They might be things like wiggly chairs. There might be things like curtain and acoustic absorptive materials, or thinking about the kind of color in space. So we've coined a term and called it sensory design inclusions, which is effectively asking the designer to think about all the ingredients that could assist in either soothing or arousing that the way the person feels in response to their environment, their sensory environment. So that's ingredient or one part of the application. The other one is flexibility. So one of the very important universal design principles. And so when it comes to work settings, our suggestion is not necessarily to have an assigned location, but to be able to choose a location based on your sensory comfort, as an example of flexibility, or in a school setting, being able to retreat to spaces and be able to do your schoolwork, not necessarily in an environment that might be with all the kids in a raucous kind of busy space, but you could have areas that enable people to do sort of focus concentration work. And we'll give you some examples. So that's the flexibility component. And then the other idea that we had in terms of application is to create a multimodal design. So being cognizant about having spaces that are high intensity, we've called them in our design lingo, and low intensity. So accommodating for that group with the different neurological thresholds. So accounting for that sort of level of comfort. And in that earlier slide, we were able to, if we were to apply a mathematical formula, we're able to say that maybe 50% of any space we design should be low intensity or low stimulation, and a third should be active and high intensity. And then the final ingredient is to create a sensory guide of all these spaces, and it might be a digital guide, it could be a printed out guide that's coded, color coded, and it shows the people who are using the space all the different variety of spaces that have been accommodated in the design. And then we keep testing this. We're doing a further a slow but study which tests the post-occupancy and the sensory comfort. And we've got a little bit of data on that, but that's to come. And how can this be applied? I've noticed there are a few questions popping up. How would you, Timmy, how would you like us to respond to the questions at the end or intermingled?
So usually we take questions at the end, but
Okay.
of course it depends on your preference as well.
At the end might be okay, just because it we've got some examples of the application next. So if we move to those examples, Winnie, here is one example of a space which uses this is an active space that's busy with people walking through, and you can see this one person working in the space in the blue top, and the other people socializing in the space, and some collaborating in the space. Um, and this space would be suitable for seekers and bystanders, those people who like to have stimulation. And if we were to break it down by the senses, we would be talking about visual stimulation because there's that big artwork on the back of the wall. Um, there's a very bright lighting, and it's a very active zone, so a space that would have a lot of movement in it. So that would be for those people. And if we were to go to the next slide. So this is another high intensity space where people are working together in one space, and they're all open, and there's a lot of activity occurring, a lot of collaboration, a lot of energy. But when they retreat to their work positions to continue on with their tasks, they're still all together and in the open. So once again, this space, and there's connection to views and light and lots of distractions and lots of stimulation for those people who need it to be focusing. So that once again, we're looking at seekers and bystanders here who would best fit that space. And now we move on to the sensors and the avoiders. And this is a good example of a space where you can retreat to, which doesn't have many distractions because it's not connected to outside light or views. There's a spray of acoustic material on the ceiling which dampens the sound. The walls are covered in an acoustic pattern, an acoustic felt material which dulls the sound. You can't see it in there, but all those lights are adjustable for lighting levels, so they can be dimmed down to be very, very soft. And of course, the curtain can be drawn so that person who's walking by will be cut out of the view, and therefore that space will become very calming, very focused, very quiet. Not a lot of bright colors or materials are used in that space. And for the photo, the light's on, but it can also be dulled down. So it's a very good space for those who require that sense of low intensity and calm. Okay, next one, next example. And here are some more retreat spaces, not quite with as much, with SDIs or sensory design inclusions, and not quite as much flexibility, but there's still a detachment of these spaces away from main busy work settings, and people can feel a sense of calm with the color palette and also with the planting, little barriers that break people away from busy settings. So that's another calming space. And if
You
we go
know,
to the,
Sonia, when I look at this one, I also think somebody could turn their desk 90 degrees to face the back wall. You know,
absolutely,
if the visual environment, like the ambient environment, people walking
yes.
by, if that's bothersome to a person, they could turn their desk, and that would reduce the visual feature for them. So it's another way of showing people have agency to make those adjustments in a space that's designed properly.
Exactly, and that's that flexibility ingredient in our
Yeah.
diagram that's really important. So having control, choice and control and autonomy over the space. And that brown color is cork in the background. So once again, soft absorptive materials are being used, and there's spray on the ceiling to absorb sound. So these are all these, now we call them sensory design inclusions that designers can think about when they're applying or responding to a brief. And then we move into more quiet spaces, which are darker, once again soothing um, to those people who who are either the sensors or the avoiders, and who need that sense of calm. So this could be a retreat space by way of example, darker colors, darker lighting, lots of soft materials, different seating options. And then I think we've got one more example from memory with the children in this setting, very tactile, lots of sort of the body can feel a lot of these sort of felt balls, and the colouring can also provide a sense of calm, but at the same time, the children can also engage with this example of a sensory wall. So this can be a space that's soft and a retreat space, but if there are many children in that space, it could also be an active space, which engages the body and the core, and that those other senses that Winnie was talking about that we don't always think about when we think about the senses, which are the sense of balance and movement, that we all do well with engaging to focus. And that is the example of the kind of research that Winnie and I have been doing, applications and examples of how these things can be applied. So we open it to you for questions.
Well, just at the outset to say, I really enjoyed your presentation, uh, because the number of the designs in the examples you gave, I'd never seen before. And I had linked with some colleagues in Ireland, the US, and Australia, and I had seen certain other designs regarding acoustic defenses and light, etc. But I certainly haven't known or come across your work in the depth and detail which perhaps I should have. So a big thank you for, I guess, enlightening us. I have a couple of questions, and then I know we will have more questions from uh, people watching and listening, and indeed Ken and Valerie and Beth may have questions. In a way, through your examples, you've answered them, and incidentally, congratulations on your research as well. Not only is it high quality in terms of methodology, but it's also very impactful. Um, Certainly, working with children, I have noted that light, light and noise are the two big issues that a number of children seem to report to me, and there are many different ways in which people can manage both. For example, ear defenders seem to be increasingly popular. But light is something which is a little bit more challenging, both in the home environment, but also in the school environment. Now, it strikes me that if some of the features which you have shown us, if those features were more commonplace, certainly
Mhm.
for a child, it might be quite a pull factor to come to school, because at a
Mhm.
minimum, the child will know that school can be a place of sensory safety for them. My question is, I mean, is this might be hard to answer because it relates to, as a society, can we afford, to equip buildings, in particular, new builds? Can we afford to equip buildings uh, with sensory design inclusion? And I appreciate that you're not quantity surveyors, so it mightn't be possible to answer the question. By the way, I think we need to afford. It's like anything that mightn't have been done in the past, and now we do it. It's maybe like a seatbelt. We didn't wear seatbelts maybe in the past, but now it's like weird to not wear a seatbelt. It's anyhow. What are your views on that? How can we get sensory design inclusion, more mainstream? Thank you.
I from a I think a advocacy and education process in forums like this, spreading the word of applying the design theory, I guess, in practice is one way. Many times designers sort of do it intuitively. Will include acoustic materials in response to dampening sound. An acoustic engineer will be on board to help us with that. This takes it a level further because we're trying to understand why are those things important and how and where should they be used, and not necessarily without thought. And largely, we do those things anyway. So, from a cost point of view, I don't think there should be a cost impost. Uh, what we just need to do is think about carefully how we cluster those areas and where we apply the use of those materials or how we create those zones. Um, so my view is it should be an education process, and in terms of impost of cost on project, I feel it should be cost neutral because it's just about applying all the other design ingredients, but just thinking about them from a sensory lens. I hope that answers your question.
To me, I have all those things are true, and there's a pragmatic feature. For example, if we're talking about employment, um, we're entering a period where all the baby boomers are getting old and there's less people to fill jobs. Jobs are changing. This is a practical cost saving choice for businesses because if they can attract and retain workers, they're in a more stable financial position. The amount that they spend recruiting people because people keep quitting because it's not a good match for them. There's a cost to that too. And so sometimes it's not just about teaching people about the sensory patterns, it's also about linking the right thing to do, which is this, which is making the adaptations, to the parts that they know and care about. So in this case, financial, spend the amount of money that you would spend recruiting, keeping the people you have. And here are some ways that you can do that. Like I always, as an occupational therapist, I always try to think about what are the priorities for the person I'm serving? What are the priorities for a teacher in a classroom? Well, if it's a teacher that has low sensory thresholds, I'm going to think about all the ways that we can make adjustments in her classroom or his classroom that serve her or him so that the teacher is more capable of serving the wide range of children in the classroom. So we have to reframe our discussion about it, and I think in the neurodiversity community, we tend to want to talk about, they need this, and we got to include them, and instead we need to say this person is a good worker for the things you need. Here are the ways that you can retain this person for your employment. So we need to think about the goals and the priorities for the people that we're serving, whether it's an employer, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a home or a community, and intersect that with these sensory features. I also talk to teachers and parents about their sensory patterns and, giving them language like, Tommy, I know you're a seeker, but I need some quiet here in the kitchen so I can make dinner. So you can either go outside or you can go to the basement. Like there's no judgment attached to it. It's just a practical feature of the decision making that every person must make.
Yes. And thank you so much for that answer. I'm hearing establish the evidence base as you have done, grow the evidence base, uh, get the new knowledge on curricula, get PPI involvement, a seat at the table. So yeah, and then create the economic argument which is there. So there's a lot in what you've said. You know what? There's a number of really great questions coming in, so I'm going to mute myself and just listen. But perhaps Ken and Valerie would like to take the lead.
Oh, indeed, yeah. Well, just thanks for that, Timmy, and thanks to Winnie and Sonja for your wonderful presentation. There's a lot of rich questions there, and I particularly like the first one. I like the rest of them all, but I like this one. And the end part is the interesting part. And he says, Eamon says, in my job, there's a multi-sensory room, which is commonly called a sleeping room, which is where many people go for a nap. He says, however, like myself, I have RSD, which has been triggered several times in my job. Never once have I wanted to go to that room, as the snores there would overwhelm me. So what else should be redesigned into something like a multi-sensory room?
People that design those rooms design it for themselves. They don't think about the other people and what they might want. So part of this is, humans have a range on the bell curve on any feature, like making it one way doesn't help. I'm sorry, Sonja, you were going to talk.
Oh, I think I was about to say I agree with you. It's so funny when one of the fads that we're seeing in the design world is this sensory room. And so, what is this sensory room? What on earth is it? It can be anything you define it, but people have made the assumption that, yeah, in this case, it's a place where you go and sleep, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a place that you go to sleep. So I wouldn't even call anything a sensory room. I would just call uh, this component of the design multimodal design. So having many diverse spaces that people can use for differing needs, whether it's sleeping or whether it's just retreat, whether it's focus, whether it's calming the senses, whether it's stimulating the senses. These are all different sensory spaces, sensory rooms. So a diversity of spaces, and not tick the box to say we're designing for diversity and inclusion because we've got a sensory room. So that's what I would say. I would not use the word sensory room, and it's so used in our settings. And
Yeah. I sometimes give the example of Marie Kondo and her organizational theory and structure. It is designed for people with low sensory thresholds, and for them,
yes,
it's a really great application. But it is, in the case of the person that wrote this question, it is a bad design for that person. So it's part of this is making sure that individuals, the bosses, the people, the agency understand that we all show up with these factors, these different sensory features, and giving people the agency to say what they need. If you understand your own sensory needs, you can say, it'll be easier for me to work if I have a dimmer switch on my light. Like that's a neutral statement. It says what you need without saying I have a disability and I have to have low lighting. And my friend Stephen Shore, he wears a ball cap because it dampens that ambient light that comes from above. It's just a typical choice that is in service to him. So this idea starts with everybody feeling comfortable, having the ability to say what they need, and having that be a reasonable thing to ask for.
Okay, well, thank you, Rachel. I maybe ask one more before we hand over to Valerie. This one comes in from Rachel Nee Duggan. She says, amazing presentation. Thank you very much. Would someone be able to move across the two axes into a different category depending on certain context, such as low energy, high cognitive strain, etc.? So that's the first question. The second question is also, can I ask how many male, females, non-binary were included in the survey? And was there a difference between the requirements across the genders?
Well, the sensory profile, which is what Sonja used, we removed items that had gender differences. So we wanted to keep it more neutral and still tell the differences, which the items are successful at doing. The study that Sonja did, we did not identify people whether they had anxiety or schizophrenia or autism. We did not ask that question, so we do not know that. But I have done studies with people with schizophrenia, with autism, with ADHD, with anxiety, and so all of these patterns show up in all of those conditions, just like they show up in the regular population. But the general population also has people that have those patterns. So this idea that we have to raise up what's different about somebody becomes less important when it's just available to everyone. When it's just automatically available, then it's not a big problem. You have the first part of the question I forgot.
Um, Sorry, I forgot that myself. But just to quickly drill into what you were saying there, we would take very much an ADHD in the position that ADHD is a genetic condition, and along the same for autism and other neurodiverse type conditions.
Right.
And so, would you see an overlap there between um, low sensory, high sensory, between different
Yeah.
neurotypes?
So for example, I'll use those two examples. In ADHD, only about 50% of the people with ADHD have a sensory feature. The other people have a cognitive feature. So we have to sort that out in that population because we don't want to use the wrong interventions based on what their particular profiles are. In autism, the most common are sound sensitivities and touch sensitivities, which intersects with social environments. It intersects with humanity and engaging socially with people, being close to people, farther away from people. One of my friends did a project with young adults in college, and there was they had a social event, and lots of people from the university, the students came. And this one young man, an autistic adult, there was like a balcony around the main room, and he stood up on the balcony the whole night. And of course, all the people, the people that don't think about neurodiversity thought, oh my God, Tom had a bad time. And when we talked to him, he said it was the best party ever. And it was the best party ever because he got in the exact right place to enjoy himself. Like that decision paradigm we use based on our experience has to stop, and we have to ask, what would make it the best for you?
Yeah.
Like sometimes we forget that we adjust our homes, we adjust our cars, we adjust our activities to meet our own needs, and everyone else is doing that same thing. In my practice, I work with people that have more vulnerabilities, and so they can't easily figure out what the adjustments might be. But luckily I've talked to lots of people, so I have a lot of ideas about things that can help them if I understand what their life needs to look like to be satisfying for them.
Okay, thanks, man. We'll hand over to Valerie there.
Yeah,
sorry, just to
Sorry.
add quickly to
Sorry.
Winnie's point. We didn't ask the question when we were doing our survey on gender, and later on we started to add that question in, but at that point in time we weren't asking that question. And then Winnie, I think the other part of that question was perhaps around maybe multiple quadrants co-occurring.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
was the first part.
That's
Yeah.
That's it. You're right.
Yeah.
So we talk about sensory patterns as if they only belong to me or you. But the truth is, they only show up in contexts and activities. So you have to intersect what the person's, innate tendencies are with the activities and the places and the activities that they want to do. Because children with ADHD that are highly active get in more trouble at church than they do on the playground. The place matters. And so we have to ask ourselves, does this context have the characteristics that are a good match for this person? Not, well, Timmy can't go there. We have to say, if we, have a balcony, then Timmy can come to the party and have fun. Like we have to say, under what conditions do the context, the environments, and the activities, what are the qualities that are required for the activity? Like if a kid has sensitivity to touch, we're going to be careful to have tools for painting, not just finger painting. We're going to make sure they don't have to get their hands wet and dirty if they don't want to. So understanding the intersection between the demands of the task, the characteristics of the environment, and that person in that place is how we figure out what to do. And that's why Sonja's work is so important, because she looks at the ratio in these organizations don't have the same ratios. The Developmental Disabilities Agency and the government agency had some similar patterns, they don't, so you have to design it based on what the environment offers and what the person needs. So it's not just the person. We got to get away from, that's what universal design would say. We got to get away from acting like the problem is inherent in the person. The challenge is inherent in the intersection of those three things: the task, the environment, and the person.
Very much.
Great. Yeah, it's so interesting. And it kind of ties in with the question I'm going to ask from Anna. Although, well, more ties in with the social aspect of what you were mentioning earlier. So Anna says, thank you for your talk. She wonders about low sensory spaces being primarily introverted, for want of a better word. She says, as an autistic person, I enjoy being in social situations, but they make her more sensorily sensitive. And it's in those situations which she appreciates things like softer lighting and finds herself thinking about the quiet sensory rooms which accommodate people in one closed off space, but not in the majority space. So she asks, do you have any ideas around how to accommodate people with sensory sensitivity in populated/majority spaces through design? That's a challenging one.
I know. I love it though, because it is the everyday experience that somebody like her has. I'm laughing because the week before the American Occupational Therapy Association met in my city, our new airport opened up. And that week before, I had been coming back from a meeting. So it was my first experience at the new airport. And I came across a place in the midst of all the busyness where people could get away. They, unfortunately, Sonja, they called it the sensory room, but it was a place. So like, I think we're starting to see more of that. In families, family gatherings are so hard because they're big and loud and busy and unpredictable. And so if we all in the family understand that Sam needs to gather himself, that's a way we can talk about it. We have a place where Sam can go and come back, and there's no judgment about it. Everybody has a chance to go to the other. If you need some quiet, I have drinks in the other room, like setting it up so that people can easily retreat, gather themselves, and come back. I really appreciate her question about the social thing, because we think that it has to be like a mosh pit, and that isn't how it has to be. You can rearrange furniture so that people sit down and talk to 2 or 3 people, even though they're in a big room. You can put barriers around so people can't get into big hunks, So Sonja, you probably have ideas about that, because that's part of the inherent features of design, is how do people gather based on what the space looks like.
Absolutely. And I was going to ditto. So creating diversity of spaces would be my answer, even within those big, large settings, whether they may be airports or museums or 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 even outdoor spaces. Um, uh, a diversity of spaces where people can find a spot that they are comfortable in for their sensory needs is important. So that would be that multimodal design and sensory design inclusion. Once again, one of those features that we said, so people can choose. The flexibility for them to choose is important, and then also for them to know what's available. So one of the things we were doing is working with the idea or the concept of creating a map or a guide of all the available spaces. And I think that could be relevant for any setting, any public space, as well as any workplace and any school. A map which shows someone where they can go, where perhaps there's a route with lower lighting or with retreat spaces. So it becomes a guide. So you don't necessarily need to go down that mosh pit path if you don't want to. And once again, we apply it to the design. We think about how we do it when we're briefing and when we're sketch planning. We think about all of these variety of spaces that we can provide. And it doesn't need to be an extra amount of money that we allocate to it. We just think about sensible planning when we're sketch planning and applying that thought process.
Think about, I was just thinking if the person asking the question, I think it'd be so cool if it was a she or if
Well, I
they,
said Anna, yeah. So
if they went into the museum and said, could you direct me? Could you help me go to the quieter places? Because that's a better experience for me. How that would start to ripple across all these public places, like without any judgment, without any additional information, just I will enjoy your museum more if I can find the quieter places. Could you direct me? Think about that reception person talking to their peers and then talking to the boss and like those also are important things that for us to do, to ask those generic questions that lead to change because more people are asking them.
Good
When you said
point.
the maps, it made me think of it, Sonja, because to get people to do a map, it might take a dozen families asking at the museum which are
Yes.
the more active places, which are the quieter places.
So, just to say, prior to Valerie posing the next question, I think we've two or three questions left. So we might just take 5 or 6 minutes before we finish up to answer those. Just conscious of everyone's time, and in particular yours, Winnie and Sonia.
Of course.
Okay. Well, if you're okay to continue for another minute or two, I have another question from Paul. Paul says, what is your experience of working with natural light, and in brackets, daylight and sunlight? Many in the neurodivergent community state they prefer natural light, but also warm light. However, natural light is often cold, and he uses a term high CCT. I'm not sure of the meaning. How to reconcile this apparent contradiction?
I don't
Do
know.
either of you know what high CCT refers
I don't.
to?
I'm not sure what that acronym stands for, and however, one of the answers that I would provide is that yes, I agree, and often natural light can is good for us all as well because we, from the other point, the biomimicry, and when we go back to living in nature and we're all healthier and better. However, yes, the color temperature of natural light can be very intense and cold, and warm light can be certainly more comforting, such as sitting around a fire, that warm light. So my answer would be again, having a diversity of spaces and having that flexibility so that you choose where you go and you move around depending on how you feel. That's why it's so important not to be bedded down to a setting. So simple things like glare reducing blinds that still allow you to look outside and be connected, but stop that intensity of light. That might be a simple feature that we've had for a long time, but we could apply that term sensory design inclusion because we're including something that was it Paul who asked the question?
Yeah.
That Paul could then create that sort of filtered light by pulling the blind down. Or Paul may sit there for half an hour and then choose to move to a different spot where he can reduce the color temperature of the light. It's interesting because when we were doing our research to see if there was anything in this kind of area for us to tap into, this is going back now well over 6 years, and we started seeing if, and that's how we found Winnie because of her amazing book that we happened to have and buy in our research, and then we emailed her. But we also found a school designed for autistic kids in the UK with lots of windows and lots of natural light. So you can imagine that sensory stimulation of that natural light for those who children who might be quite uncomfortable with that, but also the distraction of what's going on outside. So whilst it has its many positives, it can also be very distracting. And I'm not sure why, but in this article that we were reading, one of the first things when the teachers occupied the space, one of the first things they did is put big pieces of paper over the glass to make it a little bit more comfortable for the children. And I just thought, well, why don't they have curtains or blinds? Because then they could open and close and move and, it's flexible. So I think all of those things, it's about including things that you can change and move that help you be comfortable so that you can still enjoy those spaces. I think that's the answer to the question.
And Paul did come in and say that CCT is indeed color temperature. So you were
Oh,
right.
good.
Oh, okay. Now we're all smarter.
Well done. All right. Back to Ken there.
Just very quickly, and just maybe just the last question that we have for you today. This comes in from Gregory, and it's a quite long question, so I'll try and hopefully Gregory will give out before synopsizing it for you. So institutionals recognise the form of approaches that you've been recommending, Winnie, across this talk, rather than trying to have individuals advocate for what are seen as concessions to the minority. And then, how does one interrupt the status quo with innovation and change?
Not a small question for the end.
Well, that's the short version.
So the first thing I think about is, in the 1970s, in America, we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it talked about access points, one of the sections of it. And so curb cuts became a requirement for any building that any public space that people created. And people have subsequently done studies. The people who use the curb cuts the most are parents with strollers and older adults with walking devices. And so, like, when we design something just perfectly, everyone uses it. Like, we have to start thinking about the fact that it's not just for the person with a disability. If it's a good design, it's going to be great for everyone, and everyone will be able to easily use it. Like the spaces that Sonja was showing us, everyone can access it it's egalitarian, it's available to all of us. So again, thinking about, like, when I'm trying to convince healthcare agencies or insurance companies to cover something, I think about their fiduciary responsibility to spend the money wisely. And so an example from a few years ago in a project I was involved in, trying to get people that have really severe allergy responses, trying to get the insurance to see that it was cheaper to pay for the specialized food they needed or to subsidize that than to pay for one visit to the emergency room. We took our idea instead of just keep hammering away at these people are sick, these people are sick. We said it's way cheaper to pay for all this food for a month than to have one visit to the emergency room. And so that was the language of the insurance company. And they have a responsibility to use the money wisely. So sometimes we have to step out of our advocacy role, our champion role, and say, what does this other need? Like, how do they look at the situation? And how can I make a strong argument from their point of view? And that's a good way to start convincing. We have Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is one of our big insurance companies, subsidizes food as medicine for that allergy group now. And it was because we moved around the problem. We looked at it from another point of view and said, from a fiduciary responsibility point of view, this is also a good choice for you. It's not just a good choice for these families. Do you see? Like sometimes, I've been in helping worlds for my whole career, and we forget that other people have other things they have to consider. And if we include that consideration in our argument about why they should change something, we have a better shot at getting that change to happen. And they become our champions then. Blue Cross is a champion for people getting food as medicine now.
Thank you very much.
Hey, and on that uplifting note, I think we can. I see the where the positive psychology is shining through,
Oh,
Winnie. That indeed, indeed, uh, which is great. So, a big thank you to Professor Winnie Dunn, and Winnie, as you know, is from the University of Missouri, distinguished professor of occupational therapy or OT education. And then, of course, Sonja Duric, who is director and partner at Studio BE, and of course, leads the Working Brain as well, based in Australia. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's talk. I certainly have. And thank you as well to our audience and the people who'll be watching this on playback on the website, and to those who ask questions, and of course, and as ever, to Ken of ADHD Ireland, Valerie and Beth of the College of Health and Agricultural Sciences, and myself in the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health Systems. So thank you, Winnie. Thank you, Sonia. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to catch up and link in again. Thank you both.
Thank you for
thanks for
having me.
having
Thank you
us.
very much.